Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Harvey Oberfeld, retired but still issue-engaged TV reporter. Harvey, welcome to the show.
Good to be on.
Your blog, Keeping It Real, mentions changes to the media scene in Canada, and you're not happy with what's going on with Global sending all their editing to Toronto, yet they say they're going to increase local content. I don't understand how that can work.
Well, it's basically shuffling the chairs. I mean, this is what they're doing. They used to do, years ago, they produced all their little local news stations. They produced their own news in their local community of what's going on in their community. Then they got the brainwave, well, we got to consolidate. We can't have all this duplication. So a lot of what people don't know is a lot of the local station news was produced actually in Vancouver, and then it was cut and edited, produced here, and then it was fronted locally. It was fronted locally by a guy sitting at a desk in a studio that really didn't exist. Everything was run from Vancouver. Well, now what they're doing is they've decided, well, no, we want to go back into having more content locally generated. So we're going to take the people out of Vancouver, send them back to the stations, but they will take direction from new bosses in Toronto. And Toronto will be in charge. I think, in fact, they're going to use the same anchor in Toronto for all their local stations. So the guy will be on Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Regina, whatever. They've got the same guy sitting there, one after another, stamping them out like little cookies. But in the end, they're cutting 30 jobs, approximately. And I wish them well, but I just don't see where the benefits are when you cut more jobs. Have things run from, let's say, Toronto, and I really worry about the quality of what's going to go to air, and it's not getting better. I mean, here in Vancouver, the ratings are like down 200,000 from what they used to be, that's a huge drop when the population has been increasing. So they're in trouble, and instead of giving us what I believe would work, they're giving us more of what doesn't work, and that's what I find just amazing to me.
Jill Kropp is now news director and general manager at Vancouver Global, British Columbia. Is that a good move?
Well, I wrote in the blog, I don't like to be totally negative, so I wrote in the blog that, let's keep it real is the name of the blog. Let's keep it real. Jill Kropp may do better because Jill Kropp she's been around, she knows what real news is. She's been in Vancouver and BC. She's been at BC TV for many years. I had questions about the previous guy that came from Alberta and seemed to turn the news hour into what I saw as little local community news. It's just local accidents, little tame stuff, lots of, every run, walk, bicycle, trot, anything for charity, all kinds of community announcements. It was just small town news from a big town city. So Jill Kropp she knows what real news is. She knows what big news is. The problem Jill Kropp is going to face, and this didn't occur to me, somebody else pointed it out to me after I did my blog, she can only work with what she's been left. And that's the problem. You look at all the young people working at the Global, at the News Hour now, most of them don't have any experience in doing hard-hitting investigative stuff. They couldn't do a tough interview if their lives depended on it. Most of them they're good for putting in front of an accident scene or a fire or a shooting. They're good for when news is handed out. So you send them down to a press conference, you send them down to an announcement, you send them down to an accident scene, and they're on scene, and some of them even can shoot the darn story themselves and all that, and even edit it on their laptop. But you can't put those people, this is what I've been told, you can't put those people into something like, let's do a dirty trick scandal into political investigation of how the vote was rigged or something. They wouldn't know the first thing. They wouldn't know where to start. So if you want to have news as it's delivered on a platter, these people are capable of doing that. But if you want to really break the mold and go back to what was successful and have people dig and look into things and ask hard questioning, Jill Kropp is going to have a tough time of getting people to do that.
Who wrote the line for Chris Galis, the 6 o'clock anchor, 20 minor shootings in Surrey and North Delta in the past month. There's a gang war going on between Somalis and Indo-Canadians in the drug business, and they're calling them minor shootings. 20?
Well,
I mean, this is Canada. 20 shootings in a year is a lot in 1 month. And then, of course, you have Surrey's mayor who refuses to answer any questions about it.
And there was another one last night. Another shooting last night. I think there's 21 now. But that's because, again, you have people. I heard they have more producers now than they have reporters. These are all young people. A lot of them, I guess, their knowledge of what constitutes news is just not certainly what mine would be. And I would think 20 shootings in Surrey and Delta, that would be a major story, not just cover each one day to day like this is the shooting du jour, on the menu. I would have people out there investigating. I would be talking to the neighbors, terror in the neighborhood. How frightened are people? Are they changed their habits? Do they don't let their kids out after 8 o'clock? What about businesses? Are they being impacted by this? Because people don't want to go out at night in restaurants late night, and when the chances of shootings are up 20, and just so. I mean, that's what news is about. That's how you get things going. You sort of, but what they do now, you look at most of these stations, not just Global. You go to the press conference, they get the handout, they get some police guy, they go on the scene where the last shooting was, they show you the yellow tape, and all this, and then it's okay, let's go home. But the real stories aren't so much just the incident. The real stories are how it impacts the neighborhood, how it impacts the community, and I haven't seen any of that. I don't know what but they don't have the personnel, they don't have the skills.
Where's Immigration Canada in all this? If these people are new immigrants to Canada, how come if they're involved in serious crime, they're not being booted out?
Well, of course, they have to be convicted first. You have to arrest them and convict them, and then, of course, immigration can step in at that point. And they have sent people back home. There were those couple of racing drivers that were sent back to India. But
they tend to send back home people who are hard-working people who want to be citizens and have children here who are going to school and are being successful. They like to boot them out. Yeah,
well, there you go. Then it comes down to bureaucracy. But, the media, when it comes down to the way the media are reporting all this, I just think that they should be doing a lot more digging and a lot more what I'd call textured reporting than just reporting flat out what's said on a daily basis. But, these days, get the daily clip and show the old footage, show the today's footage. Okay, we're done. We can go home.
We'll have more with Harvey Oberfeld right after this.
More and more people are looking to the Internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Harvey Oberfeld, retired but still engaged television reporter. Harvey, I miss it the way you would challenge politicians to answer questions. Have people lost the guts, or have they just lost the technique, or were never taught the technique of how to try to get answers out of people who don't like to tell you the truth?
It's everything you said and more. First of all, you have to have a real core desire to get the truth out, what's really going on. They're going to have their press conference, but you've got to ask the questions that you have to have thought about it. You have to ask the questions that you think the average person back home really wants to know. For example, my latest blog is about the announcement about St. Paul's Hospital being moved. So most of the media, there they were, they showed the fancy drawings, they had the people from the hospital saying this is why it has to be moved, and then they had people saying, oh, the old hospital is so terrible, 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 terrible. And no one had the intelligence or the journalistic inquisitiveness to say, how much longer will it take, let's say, to get somebody from the West End to this new hospital, a terminal in Maine, through Vancouver's crowded, congested streets, at the best of times? How much longer? So if you have a heart attack or a stroke in a high-rise in the West End, and you get somebody comes there to get you, the ambulance comes. And by the way, I think they closed the ambulance station in the West End some years ago, too. So let's say a roving ambulance comes and gets you, and used to take you to Burrard. How many more minutes, how much more distance will you have to suffer in the ambulance, or maybe hanging your life hanging on a thread, to get through the downtown to Terminal Main to get some medical help? And with a heart attack or a stroke, every single minute can be life or death. So they're going to add several minutes onto that trip. And no one asked that. Nobody asked that. I've seen 6 days of stories on 6 ducks or something being wet or tainted with oil from English Bay. 6 ducks, 6 days of stories. But here's the thing, where there's 100,000 people living and working in the West End and Cole Harbour, 100,000 people who will not have a hospital now in their midst. And no one raises the issue, what impact will that have on public safety? What impact will that have on senior citizens, on people who have strokes, people with serious injuries, people who have heart attacks? You would think they would ask that if they're so interested in the health of the ducks. You think they'd care enough about human health and human survival to ask that question. And nobody, as far as what I saw in the newspapers, on radio, and on TV, nobody asked it. And the reason for that, Jim, is they don't have the experience, they don't have the attitude, and frankly, they're not really serious, experienced journalists. The old days, you would go work somewhere small and develop. The cream would rise to the top, or, people with experience would rise to the top, and they'd get the jobs at the big stations. What they do now is they just bring them out of school or some small station where they barely learnt anything, and they put them on in front of the biggest, audience in Canada, at various stations here, and at all of them. And I just don't think that works. In fact, you could be an anchor here without any long. Look at the CBC anchor. They've got a guy who's in his 30s, has no gravitas whatsoever. And he's the anchor, and I don't think anybody would trust him if there was a big earthquake. This is the problem. They've gone for looks and flash, and they have sacrificed experienced journalism, and then they wonder why their people aren't watching. They wonder why their ratings are falling, and they wonder why their advertising revenues are dropping.
Well, I remember when I came to Vancouver, the general rule was unless you had 10 years experience, don't bother applying.
Well, that's what happened to me. When I graduated from university in Montreal with a degree in political science, and I'd done 1 year of writing for a company paper down there, and I applied at, I wrote to every newspaper in Canada, and they wrote me back from the Vancouver Sun, sort of a letter saying, nicely, who the hell do you think you are wanting to come to live in the paradise of Canada without any experience? Go get some experience and then talk to us. So I did. I thought they were being very rude, but they were right. So I went off. I went to Saskatoon, and I worked there for 6 months. I went to Regina. I worked there for 2 years, more than 2 years. And then I came to Vancouver, made an application, and now they hired me. And even then they started me as a junior. But now I had 2.5 years experience on top of 1 year of industrial writing for a company newspaper. So now I got in at the bottom, and I worked my way up. But these days, you come out of BCIT, you just come out of somewhere, oh, sure, we'll put you on the big 6 o'clock show. You don't have to, just stand there, and they want to know so much not of your journalistic credentials. Seems to me what they're looking for is, can you shoot and edit also, so we can get rid of some staff and we'll just have you do everything? It doesn't matter what it looks like. I've seen some stuff on air that has clearly been edited and probably shot by the person who's doing the story. And you know what? It looks like a story done by the person who's doing the story.
Or Global TV, 2 nights in a row, their camera for the lead story has some kind of a water bubble in it.
Yeah, those are technical things. I mean, that can happen to anybody. I'm much more worried about the journalistic bubble that we're in at that station, and even some of the other stations also. It doesn't bode well for the future. And when you point out these things, you would think they would try to learn or something. No. They just say, you're wrong. Their ratings are dropping. Their revenues are going in the toilet. But you're wrong for pointing out that what we're running is crud.
What about this movement where they want all these young faces on television? When I was young and watching Walter Cronkite on TV, I never felt that he was lying to me or not telling me what was going on because he was a much older person than I was. I really respected his experience going back to World War II. And I thought, if anybody can describe a war in Vietnam, it's somebody who's been to a real big war.
Yeah, well, you need experience. I mean, you need people that can do the stories with some credibility, who remember what happened at City Hall, let's say 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Now it's barely if they even know where the place is. And you need some young people. You need young people to do sort of the social media type stories. You need them to sort of get their foot in the doorstep and do maybe smaller city councils or whatever local community stories. You do need some. You need new blood, but you need to have also as the anchor, as the basis for your show. You've got to have seasoned journalists who just aren't tired and just wanting to put their time in and get the check and go home. You have to have people that are, given the time and effort to do in-depth stuff, investigative stuff, and want to do it. But I don't see much of that anymore. I got to tell you, I don't see that at all. And I think the industry is hurting for that. I think there's a lot more interference behind the scenes than a lot of us even know about. I've heard some stuff behind the scenes at just about all these stations, and it happens, but it's happening more than it ever used to. I will say this, people say, well, it's all owned by millionaire corporations. Well, of course. I mean, when I joined BCTV, it was owned by the Griffith family. They weren't exactly middle class. I mean, it was owned by multimillionaires. And, the best thing I can say about them, I don't recall ever seeing any interference in them when we did stories that really made the government unhappy. Dirty Tricks, Gracie's Finger. When I did the story on Woodward's, one of our biggest advertisers, the way they were treating their staff, and laying them off and firing them, we raised hell. And the only admonition I ever recall getting from upstairs in Carpet City was, you guys better be right. And that was it. They gave us the freedom because they were sitting there watching the ratings and watching the advertising money coming in, and they thought, go for it, boys, as long as you are doing, as long as you're right. But I get the feeling now it's much harder to do any kind of story that is critical of business, because, there might be friends of the people up top. We saw the situation at CTV. We saw the situation at CTV where the president of Bell Media actually interfered directly in trying to have the chairman of the CRTC not appear in a story that was about a CRTC major decision, and that got leaked out, and now he lost his job over it. And kudos to Bell Media, or BCE, for getting rid of this guy named Krull, because he had definitely interfered. But how many other stories are there that where somebody up top doesn't like what's going on and interferes or raises questions and the story gets killed, or they just know in the newsroom, the management know there's certain stories we just don't do anymore because the bosses won't like them, and that's a terrible affront to journalism. It's an affront to democracy, and I think the millionaires up top should just realize there's money in quality journalism and stay out of it as long as they're making money. Because you look at all these stations that aren't making money, they're losing money, their revenues are down, their profits are down, and not just TV but radio too. And what have they done? They've destroyed those news products from up top, not from down below, from up top. And now they're wondering, well, what's going on? How come we're not getting the revenues? It's because they interfered. It's a management problem. It wasn't really a reporter problem. It was a management problem, a hiring problem, and now they're paying the price for it, and the shareholders are suffering because of it.
Harvey, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
You're welcome.
Check out Harvey's blog, Keeping It Real. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Check out our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. We're also on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.